Archaeological digs in the early 20th century in the deserts of Iraq lifted the veil on the true face of Babylon. Among the ruins, traces of technologies were found that, according to mainstream science, simply could not have existed thousands of years ago. These discoveries challenge our conventional understanding of human development and force us to take a new look at the capabilities of ancient civilizations. Could the builders of that time have used the laws of physics to create a level of comfort we consider a modern achievement? The answer to this question has the power to turn legends into factual reality and prove that our ancestors possessed secrets we are only just beginning to figure out today. For a long time, scientists were sure that humanity developed in a very simple and gradual way, from stone axes to iron swords and modern machines. It was believed that the ancient Greeks and Romans were the most advanced, and that those who came before them were almost primitive people. Previously, such finds were often dismissed as anomalies, or it was assumed there had been a mistake in the dating. The situation began to change in the mid-19th century. There are reports of finds in ancient strata whose age still sparks heated debate. Such discoveries became more and more frequent, and people started to realize that official history was missing something. The real breakthrough came in Mesopotamia. In 1936, near Baghdad, a clay jar with a copper tube and an iron rod inside was found. In 1938, archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig suggested this was an ancient battery. A bold hypothesis exists that these vessels might have been used for primitive electroplating. All these findings force us to acknowledge that ancient civilizations possessed secrets we are only beginning to understand. One of the most captivating discoveries was a system of pipes beneath the foundation of the main palace. Archaeologists uncovered a network of fired clay laid with incredible precision. Mainstream science typically claims that ancient people simply dumped waste into the street or used open ditches. Historians say that full-fledged sewage and pressurized water systems appeared many centuries later. But one engineer on the expedition decided to test how this system worked. He noticed that the pipes were joined with a waterproof sealant made from natural resin. This allowed water to flow under pressure without seeping into the ground. It turns out that thousands of years before modern cities appeared, the inhabitants of Babylon were already enjoying a level of comfort we consider an achievement of our time. Working in residential areas, researchers stumbled upon a house belonging to a wealthy merchant. Inside a room, beneath a layer of dust, they found strange glass plates. They were perfectly transparent and had a slight thickening in the center. In academic circles, it's commonly believed that ancient glass was cloudy and uneven, used only for beads or cheap ornaments. Scholars insist that people only learned to make quality lenses in the Middle Ages. However, when one archaeologist accidentally placed such a plate on a clay tablet covered in small text, the letters suddenly became huge and clear. It was a simple magnifying glass, created by a craftsman who understood the laws of optics long before physics existed as a science. This small object turned the idea of how ancient scholars studied the world and the stars on its head. The researchers were particularly stunned by the story of the metal tools found. In one of the craft workshops, archaeologists dug up saws and drills made from an alloy that hadn't rusted for thousands of years. Official history states that people of that time only worked with soft copper or bronze. It's believed that hard stones like granite were processed through simple abrasion or using ordinary sand. But the marks on Babylonian stone slabs told a different story. Deep, even grooves were visible on the stone. the kind that could only be left by a very hard metal rotating at high speed. A stonemason present at the excavation confidently stated that such marks are left by a modern rotary cutter. The hypothesis of mechanized labor in antiquity could significantly expand our understanding of the history of technology. Finishing their inspection of the workshops, the team found a strange mechanism made of bronze gears. It was heavily damaged by time, but even from the remains, it was clear that it was part of some kind of computational device. Modern textbooks state that the first complex mechanisms appeared only in Europe during the Renaissance. Historians insist that ancient people could only build levers and simple pulleys. But this device proved that engineers capable of creating machines to calculate the movements of planets existed in Babylon. These findings pose complex questions for researchers, demanding a different approach. Each such object becomes a silent witness that we greatly underestimate our ancestors, who may have possessed manufacturing secrets lost for millennia. Continuing excavations in the central part of Babylon, archaeologists encountered a story hidden not only beneath layers of earth, but also behind the silent walls of local legends. An elderly worker who had been helping the group from day one once led a professor to a place where the ground had collapsed after a heavy rain. There, in a deep gully, the edge of a massive slab coated with a layer of natural resin was visible. The old man whispered that his grandfather called this place the House of Silence, where ancient priests were said to have kept the very voice of the sky. When they managed to move the slab, the team discovered a narrow passage leading to a small room with perfect acoustics. Along the walls stood tall clay jars, their necks pointing toward the center of the room. Mainstream science usually says such vessels were only used for storing grain or wine. Historians and universities are convinced that Babylonian architecture was focused solely on external grandeur. But in this room, everything was different. If a person stood in the center and spoke even the quietest word, it was amplified many times over and returned to them, as if spoken through a powerful speaker. The expedition's engineers were amazed at how precisely the angles of the walls and the shape of the jars were calculated. It turned out that for Babylonians, sound was as important a part of daily life as bread. In such rooms, important city assemblies or courts could be held, where the judge's voice needed to sound authoritative and thunderous without any effort. This wasn't magic. It was pure physics, used by ancient builders to make life in a huge city more organized. Another strange story occurred during the study of how Babylonians lit their enormous buildings. Archaeologists long puzzled over how people worked in deep halls that had no windows. In academic circles, it's assumed ancient inhabitants used torches or oil lamps. However, on the ceilings of Babylonian buildings, scientists found not a trace of soot. If torches had burned there for years, the stones would be black. Historians often ignore this fact, suggesting the walls might have been frequently cleaned. But one team member found, in an inner courtyard, the remains of a system of mirrors made of polished bronze. The mirrors were mounted on movable stands. By directing a beam of light from the street to a specific point in a corridor, the mirror system could transmit it to the farthest rooms. This was an ancient light pipe, allowing them to fill underground chambers with bright daylight. This discovery explained why the Babylonians' way of life seemed so clean and bright. They weren't blackening the sky with fire. They were literally inviting the sun in as a guest. Studying the daily life of ordinary citizens was especially interesting. In one house, archaeologists found a strange stone bathtub with two pipes leading to it, one from above and one from below. Official history says ancient people simply poured water over themselves from basins. It's believed that heating water in those times was a long and difficult process. But beneath the floor of this bath, researchers discovered a small chamber for smoldering coals, functioning like a modern boiler. A Babylonian could have taken a hot bath after a workday simply by lighting a small fire in a special compartment. This was a level of comfort that only appeared in Europe 2,000 years later. The enigmatic nature of the finds extended to the most ordinary things. For example, in the kitchen of one house, they found a copper cauldron whose walls were coated with a thin layer of silver. Modern science calls this decorative embellishment. But from a practical perspective, silver kills bacteria and keeps water fresh for much longer. It turns out that the ancient housewives of Babylon knew about the properties of metals and used them to protect their families from illness. They weren't just cooking food. They were using chemical knowledge in their everyday lives. This story from Babylon shows that we often look down on our ancestors, considering them primitive. But when you see their plumbing, mirror lighting, and heating systems, it becomes clear that their daily life was organized much more intelligently and ecologically than ours. We found not just ruins, but traces of a civilization that knew how to live in harmony with nature, using its intellect to create comfort that didn't require destroying everything living around it. To understand how the finds from Babylon truly change history, we need to look at them not as magical objects, but as evidence of a very high level of engineering thought. Each such discovery is a serious challenge to official textbooks, which are accustomed to portraying ancient humans as something like skilled but limited craftsmen. Archaeologists continued digging and discovered, beneath a layer of sand, a city planning system that amazed them with its logic. Historians are certain that any knowledge of electricity or energy transmission in antiquity is mere speculation. But if these copper structures truly served to protect buildings from lightning or to dissipate static charge, it would mean the Babylonians understood the physics of atmospheric phenomena thousands of years before Benjamin Franklin. This completely changes our understanding of how safe and well-planned life was in this ancient metropolis. In the daily life of ordinary people, this was reflected in astonishing precision. In one of the craft quarters, scientists found a stone-working workshop. There lay basalt slabs whose surfaces were polished to a mirror finish. Modern science claims that such polishing in antiquity was achieved through months of hard manual labor using sand and water. But under a microscope, microscopic circular marks were visible on the stone surface, the kind typically left by a rotating tool. This suggests the Babylonians had primitive but effective machine tools. If confirmed, the history of technology would need to be rewritten. It would mean mechanization began not in the 15th century, but in deep antiquity. This knowledge was simply lost later. And another fact that forces science to question old dogmas is related to medicine and chemistry. In one house, archaeologists found a set of ceramic vessels with narrow necks. Analysis of their contents showed the presence of acids and metal salts. Official history says chemistry as a science only appeared in the Middle Ages thanks to alchemists. Scientists are used to thinking that ancient people only used what nature provided in its pure form. However, these vessels could have been part of the process of gilding jewelry. If Babylonian jewelers used chemical deposition of gold rather than just hammering, it proves they possessed deep knowledge about the structure of matter. The life of a wealthy Babylonian was filled with things that, for their creation, would have required sophisticated laboratories whose existence we never even suspected. The city's food supply system deserves special attention. Along the canals, archaeologists discovered the remains of mechanisms powered by the river's current. These were gear trains made of hardwood and bronze. According to the official version, such complex gear systems appeared only in ancient Greece. But the Babylonian finds show that the automation of field irrigation was a common practice. This changes economic history. If people had machines for agriculture, they had free time for science and art. This explains why Babylon became a cultural center of the world. But it also leaves the question, why didn't these technologies spread further and were forgotten for centuries? The mystery of these finds isn't that they look like technology from outer space, but how logical they are and how integrated into daily life. In ordinary residential houses, they found devices for observing shadows that could tell time with minute precision. We're used to thinking that time was a flexible concept for ancient people. But Babylon proves their lives were clearly scheduled and subject to the laws of mathematics. If all these facts were officially recognized, human history would cease to look like a slow and painful climb out of darkness. It would start to look like a series of brilliant flashes. Babylon was one such flash, where the human mind managed to create a comfortable and technological life using simple materials. Every found mechanical part or chemical residue in an old jar is a reason to admit that we aren't the first to figure out complex things. Our ancestors simply went their own way, and that way was far more progressive than old textbooks try to make us believe. Continuing their research, archaeologists delved into how the Babylonians organized life on the scale of entire city blocks. One of the most significant finds was a ventilation system that ran through the city underground. Official science is accustomed to thinking that ancient metropolises were stuffy, foul-smelling places where people suffered from overheating and bad odors. University scholars say that air circulation in those times depended solely on open windows and doors. But beneath Babylon, researchers discovered a network of vertical shafts that went deep into the ground and connected with horizontal tunnels. At the bottom of these shafts, there was always water coming from hidden underground channels. When the hot desert air entered such a shaft, it was rapidly cooled upon contact with the water and, under pressure, was forced into living quarters through special openings in the floor. This was a natural air conditioning system that worked without a single motor. Thanks to this, the life of an ordinary citizen was protected from the oppressive heat. People could relax in the coolness of their homes, while the outside temperature soared above 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. This discovery completely changes our understanding of past architecture, proving that the Babylonians could manage airflows with the precision of modern engineers. The mystery of this discovery deepened when, in one of these ventilation nodes, they found remains of strange filters. They were made of several layers of fine copper mesh and palm fibers impregnated with an antiseptic compound. Academic science typically claims that the concept of air hygiene only appeared in the 20th century. It's believed that ancient people didn't know about the existence of dust or wind-borne microbes. But these filters suggest that Babylonians cared about the quality of the air they breathed. They consciously cleaned it of sand and impurities, creating a unique microclimate inside the city. This was a civilization that prioritized human health and comfort, using subtle knowledge of biology and physics. While studying the market rows, archaeologists came across a building that, by all indications, was an ancient archive or bank. Inside were thousands of clay tablets. But what drew the scientists' attention wasn't the tablets themselves, but the construction of the shelves. The shelves were made of fired wood, coated with a layer of a special lacquer that wouldn't burn. When researchers tried to set a piece of this coating on fire, it only darkened slightly, but didn't ignite. Official history says that fireproof materials are an achievement of the chemical industry of the last few centuries. But the Babylonians already understood how to protect their important documents from fires, which were common in densely built cities. The life of a Babylonian official or banker was surrounded by things that ensured the safety of information. They didn't just write on clay. They created security systems we think of as modern. In the same building, they found strange seals made from a metal alloy that couldn't be counterfeited by ordinary casting. Each seal had a unique microscopic pattern that could only be seen at a specific angle of light. This was ancient copy protection, a kind of holographic sticker of its time. This discovery forces a reassessment of the history of forensics and law, showing that Babylon's financial system was protected far more seriously than scientific circles tend to believe. Moving further towards the outskirts of the city, archaeologists discovered the remains of an irrigation system that supplied water not only to the fields, but also to the private gardens of citizens. Modern science claims that irrigation in Mesopotamia was primitive. Slaves simply drew water with leather bags and poured it into ditches. Historians say it was hard, inefficient labor. However, beneath Babylon, they found a system of automatic sluice gates that operated on their own when the water level in a canal reached a certain point. Inside these mechanisms were cork floats and stone counterweights. When the water rose, the float pushed a lever, and the gate opened, channeling water to the needed area. When the level dropped, the system closed. This allowed gardens to be watered around the clock without human intervention. The life of a Babylonian gardener was automated to a level that seems incredible for that era. Thanks to this, the city was literally lush with greenery, turning into a blooming oasis in the middle of a lifeless desert. This discovery changes our understanding of agricultural history. The mystery of the finds reached its peak when, in one of the foundations, they found a time capsule. Inside it lay a city plan, drawn on a thin sheet of bronze. This plan showed communication lines that archaeologists hadn't even excavated yet. But the strangest thing was that the scale of the map was accurate to the millimeter. Academic science insists that ancient maps were schematic and inaccurate, as people lacked instruments for measuring long distances. But this bronze plate proved the opposite. The Babylonians had surveying methods that allowed them to see the city as a single entity, as if they were looking at it from a great height. Concluding this phase of work, researchers discovered a storage room for writing instruments. Among the ordinary styluses for clay lay strange pens with metal tips, containing a cavity for ink. These were the predecessors of modern fountain pens. Official history says such pens only appeared in the 19th century. It's believed that ancient people constantly had to dip their instruments in inkwells, making writing a slow and messy process. But Babylonian scribes could write for hours without lifting their implement from a sheet of parchment or leather. This changes the history of writing and education, showing that the speed of information exchange in Babylon was much higher than we are used to thinking. All these findings, from fireproof lacquers to automatic irrigation systems, paint a picture of a world where man was not a slave to nature. He was its partner, able to use the laws of physics for his own convenience. The history of humanity, as it is taught now, seems incomplete and truncated because it doesn't account for these ingenious solutions of ancient engineers. Babylon, beneath the archaeologists' feet, continued to reveal its secrets, proving that progress isn't just electricity and the internet, but above all, the mind's ability to solve complex problems in the simplest and most effective ways. Continuing along the ancient paved streets, archaeologists came across a residential house that was better preserved than the others. Inside, they found an object that at first glance seemed like an ordinary kitchen implement. It was a massive stone slab with a smooth depression and a heavy cylinder that fit perfectly into it. Academic science typically describes such finds as grain grinders, claiming that the daily life of ancient women consisted of endlessly and laboriously grinding grain by hand. Scholars say it was backbreaking work that took up all their time. However, upon closer inspection, traces of a mounting point for a drive belt were found on the cylinder's axle. It turned out that this mill was part of a small mechanical assembly, powered either by a domestic animal or a small water wheel in the yard. The woman didn't need to spend hours rubbing stone against stone. She simply poured in the grain, and the mechanism did all the work for her. This was ancient household technology that freed up time for raising children or learning. Such a discovery fundamentally changes the understanding of Babylon's social structure. It suggests that even in ordinary families, time and human labor were valued, and engineering thought was directed towards easing daily burdens. This proves that progress in antiquity wasn't limited to palaces and temples, but entered every home. In the same house, in a storeroom, researchers found sealed vessels made from a special type of ceramic, coated on the inside with a layer of glaze. When one of these containers was opened, they found oil inside that hadn't gone rancid over thousands of years and had retained its properties. The official history of medicine and chemistry claims that preserving food for such a long time without modern additives and vacuum packaging is impossible. It's believed that ancient people constantly suffered from poor quality food. But the Babylonians used natural resin and a specific combination of minerals in the ceramic composition to create an environment inside the vessel that inhibited bacterial growth. This was applied biology in action, built into the daily life of a very ordinary family. The floor in this house's bedroom was of particular interest. It was a double floor, and in the voids between the layers of brick, they found remains of burnt herbs and charcoal. Modern science believes that heating dwellings in antiquity was limited to ordinary hearths in the middle of the room, which produced a lot of smoke and soot. Historians are sure that people simply wrapped themselves in animal skins to keep warm in winter. But the discovered underfloor heating system proved that the Babylonians understood the principles of convection. Hot air from a small furnace located outside the house circulated under the floor, warming the living spaces without polluting the room air with combustion products. This was a level of comfort we today consider a feature of elite housing. For the inhabitants of Babylon, it seems to have been a standard of quality living. The mystery of these finds lay in their abundance. This wasn't an isolated whim of a rich man. It was a city-wide culture of comfort. In a neighboring block, archaeologists discovered a workshop where shoes were made. There they found sandals with a cushioned sole, inside which layers of springy cork and fine copper wire were placed. Academic science says ancient footwear was flat and harmful to the feet. It's believed that orthopedics is a science of the last 100 years. But Babylonian shoemakers created footwear that accounted for the stress on the spine during long walks on stone-paved streets. The daily life of a citizen, who moved around a lot for trade or construction, was protected by these small engineering tricks. The discoveries in Babylon force us to completely reconsider the history books. If it was previously thought that the ancient world was a time of manual labor and superstition, we now see that our ancestors possessed serious technologies. Acknowledging that thousands of years ago people used gas lighting systems, complex mechanisms, and even chemical principles for gilding metals changes the very essence of the historical timeline. It suggests that the industrial and scientific revolutions began not in Europe a couple of centuries ago, but in deep antiquity. This knowledge was simply lost or forgotten later. These discoveries transform history from a straight line of progress into a chain of rises and falls. They prove that humanity has already achieved a high standard of living and comfort without using electricity or oil. Such facts force scientists to admit ancient civilizations were not a stepping stone to our time, but fully fledged and developed worlds in their own right. The story of Babylon teaches us that great knowledge can disappear if it is not preserved, and that today we are far from the first to learn to harness the forces of nature for a comfortable life.